Welcome into Be Conscious. I'm Damien Barling. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you to all of those who have subscribed. Those numbers are growing each week, and we're really thankful for that. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Have every episode sent right to your podcast app. Never miss anything. And if you think we're worth it, rate us 5 stars. That helps us get noticed on the various algorithms across the different podcast platforms. Coming up in a few minutes, Dr. Robin DiAngelo, professor and author of the book White Fragility, is going to join us. Now, disclaimer, Dr. DiAngelo is white. She teaches classes about how and why white people have such a difficult time discussing racism. The book is really fascinating. And please try to remember, when we say white people, it doesn't mean every single white person that ever existed. We're speaking in generalities. You want to connect with me, feedback, good and bad. I take it all, dbarling at saclocalmedia.com. You can reach me on Twitter at Damien Barling. Launched an Instagram account for the podcast as well at Be Conscious Pod. Just opened a Facebook page, Be Conscious with Damien Barling. You can find us across all social media platforms. And, speaking of, those social media tags, there's this recent social media trend. And it's not even a trend on social media. It just becomes a trend through social media. And that's this thing where black people, and most recently black children, are going about their daily lives, whether it's selling water, mowing lawns, whether it's being on the golf course, renting Airbnbs, and they're having the police called on them. Now, if you're white and listening to this isn't about making you feel guilty. You're not guilty by stereotype. This is about understanding the fragile state of race relations in 2018 America. And it would be foolish to blame all of this on Donald Trump and his administration. But it'd be equally as foolish not to acknowledge the role that he and his administration have played in this upkick of racially charged interactions between white people and those of other races. I mean, think about this. Starbucks. Barbecue Becky, napping in a dorm room. We just mentioned the 9-year-old girl selling water and Permit Patty who went after her. There's enough racially motivated confrontations to launch a college course on the subject. The Starbucks case is the one I've always been the most fascinated with. You know the story by now. Dante Robinson and Rashawn Nelson were waiting for a friend in a Philadelphia Starbucks when the manager of the store called the police because the two men hadn't ordered anything. Now, let's get past the absurdity of calling the police on someone in a Starbucks who hasn't ordered anything. And let's get past the apology from Starbucks and the shutdown of the stores for racial sensitivity training and focus on the one entity that seems to have gotten a pass in all this. Why the hell did the police arrest them? And better yet, why did the police even show up? Now, if you wasted your time reading the millions of replies and comments on various social media platforms to the video, you would have seen people prepared to defend Starbucks to the death. You would have read things like they should have ordered something. And Starbucks has the right to enforce their policy. That's their business. Follow the rules or get booted out. I'm glad they got arrested. Those are all direct quotes from various social media platforms. And as you all know, there is and was no policy about ordering anything. There never has been. They were doing nothing wrong. And why wouldn't the police ask the manager on the phone, do you have a policy against waiting in your store? Or why wouldn't he ask the manager when they got there, well, what exactly are these men doing wrong? No, they just walked in and arrested them. Meaning what they were doing, legal or otherwise, didn't matter. This isn't a Starbucks problem. They're at fault for sure. But this is a policing problem. I mean, how did the police not get there and laugh at this? Well, that's easy. And that's where Dr. Robin DiAngelo is going to come into play here. Because what they did is they're acting on a fear of black people, particularly black men, and they're acting on what they hope to be white solidarity. Now, I don't mean that in a Charlottesville tiki torch and polo shirt type of way. What I mean is the manager, a person of authority, calls the police an entity of authority with the expectation that there's no way the police would allow two black men to challenge that united front of authority. You see, white people see the police as protection. Black people, they don't see the police that way. And there's enough examples to show you why. I mean, there's 12-year-old Tamir Rice. There's Alston Sterling. When the police were called on Alston Sterling, it wasn't because he was a criminal with a violent past. It was because he was selling CDs outside of a convenience store. We've seen the Philandro Castile video. We saw a video just last week of a young man calmly following every confusing police instruction he was given before being tased, cuffed, and dragged away. So police don't use 911 like a personal security service the same way white people choose to. Again, we use the examples of the 4 black women who were playing golf. They called the police on them because they said they were playing too slow. The police got there and said, this is silly. This isn't a police matter. We're leaving. This is where Dr. Robin DiAngelo comes into play, and I'd like to welcome her in now. She's the author of the new book, White Fragility. And first of all, Dr. DiAngelo, congratulations on the new book. It's an extraordinary read.
Oh, good. I love hearing that. So you've been reading it?
Oh, I read it. I finished it. I've told people, I've called the book How to Talk to White People About Racism.
Mm-hmm.
We were just laying out some of and I know this is kind of separate from the book, but I am kind of curious your thoughts on it. We were just, during your introduction, kind of laying out the, recent videos we've seen of, whether it was Permit Patty or Barbecue Becky or all of these different things, the women on the golf course, the Airbnb, and all of these incidents where the police are being called. Why do you think these incidents, there seems to be a massive uptick in them? Why do you think that they're happening at the rate that they are?
So I have 2 thoughts on that. On the one hand, I think there's probably not actually an uptick. It's just that we have video now and we have social media. But in the same way that police executions are increasing necessarily, but white people haven't believed that black people have these experiences, but now we can record them. So that's one piece. I also think there's more social permission for racism under the current administration, and so that can also be like easing people's white people's sense that they can express their anxiety and their fear and their resentment and their contempt, quite frankly.
I pointed this out during your introduction, and I feel like I have to point it out again. You're white. And
yes, absolutely.
I'm like, how do white people react to you when you talk about this stuff?
Well, again, there's kind of two ways. And the first thing is the reality of implicit bias and the reality of our lifetime of all our role models and teachers, being white, engenders a kind of legitimacy to my voice that is not granted to people of color. And I mean, that's part of the tragedy in that people of color have been saying what I say. I mean, I have my own way of saying it, and I am an insider. I might be articulating it, in a particular way, but I'm not saying anything you don't know or experience. But sadly, white people are more receptive to hearing it from white people because we have been granted kind of that objective human voice. And that brings up the dilemma of reinforcing the white position and centrality, even as I seek to challenge it. But if my voice can be heard, then by God, I'm going to use it to challenge whiteness. The other piece is that white people like hearing from people of color if you are not challenging us, if you're talking about the tragedy of racism on people of color. So here's an example. I was speaking at a conference. There were 3 keynotes. The first 2 that went before me, one was an indigenous woman and one was a black woman. And both of them talked about the trauma of racism on people of color. They both got standing ovations. So it would appear that would be kind of a norm there. I got up and directly challenged the white people in the room and their ideas of themselves as, the choir, and no standing ovation. There's a kind of punishing you when you break with white solidarity. So I get both, right? Overall, I am heard more openly, but I can also, it can play out by rewarding people of color, again, if they talk about victimization and don't challenge white people's positions.
If you're talking to a group of, let's say, all white people, and then you're talking to a group of white people, but there are black people mixed in or people of other races mixed in. Do the white people react differently when they're alone?
When there are people of color in the room, when there are black people in the room, there is there's a self-consciousness and a carefulness that you may not see when they're not in the room. But overall, white people can be incredibly careful when the topic is race and racism, right? We're very comfortable basically taking up all the space, dominating the discussion, speaking first, most and last. In general, but when the topic is race, suddenly we kind of step back, don't want to take any risk, let people of color do all the heavy lifting. And so you definitely see that difference. Almost every question you're asking me, there's kind of two basic ways that white people respond. So one is the carefulness. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, there's a lack of carefulness that is stunning to me. Right. Because white people do not know our history, we are not taught our history, because we are seen as individuals, and we see ourselves as individuals. I should say we see ourselves as individuals. I doubt that people of color see us as individuals, right? I mean, you see me, you're talking to Robin right now, but you're talking to a white woman right now, right? And because we don't have that consciousness or awareness, we can do some pretty harmful things without being able to connect to what it represents on a larger scale. So the example I often use is getting feedback once from a friend of mine who's a black woman who said, "You are always talking over me, Robin, and that is your racism." And I just kind of reared back and went, "What? No, it's not. It's not my racism. It can't be. I do it to everybody." I have that classic idea that if you do something to everyone, it can't be racist or racialized, right? Mm-hmm. And she really helped me understand that when you do it to me, you're bringing a history. You're not outside of your group. And I've had a lifetime of being talked over and silenced by white people. And part of being white is that I didn't have to attend to that. That basically what I was saying to her is, well, this is my preferred mode of engagement. So if it's difficult for you, I guess you're going to have to figure it out and adapt to it, because this is how I talk. Which is a classic kind of entitled sense of privilege. This does require something of us, which is paying attention to our positions and how that changes the interaction.
You mentioned there are so many lines in the book that really stood out for me. One of them was, and I might be paraphrasing a little bit here, but racism is not reserved for evil people.
No, I think the most brilliant adaptation of racism post-civil rights was that it got reserved for evil people, right? It got reduced to the most simplistic formula. A racist is always an individual, right? So that just obscures the system of racism. This individual is consciously biased towards people of color, so it must be conscious and aware. And this individual intends to be mean, must be intentional. And that definition, right, an intentionally and aware, mean individual, exempts virtually all white people from the system of racism, right? And so it actually protects racism. And it also, I think, is the root of white defensiveness. Because if that's my definition, and you've just suggested I've done something racist, you have just put me in this camp of an intentional and mean person. And now I'm going to need to defend myself and what I perceive as my very moral character. So it's just functioned fabulously to look progressive, right? Mm-hmm. Racism's bad.
And you mentioned the term white privilege a few moments ago, and it's an extraordinary term that I think people don't quite understand what it means. And again, it's something you broke down in the book beautifully, and it's kind of along the lines of no matter, in a term that we use in 2018, no matter how woke you are or how woke you think you are, or no matter how poor you are, you still reap the benefits of what white privilege actually is.
Absolutely. I think a lot of white people hear privilege and they think two things. One, that you should be able to feel privilege. Mm-hmm. And, I'm walking through the world and I don't feel it. And actually, that's its sign, right? It's a non-issue. It's so internalized and taken for granted. And the second thing we think of is, oh, so you're saying I don't face any barriers and haven't struggled. No, I'm not saying that, but you sure have not faced this one. And this one is huge. And in fact, you've benefited by not facing this one because it has helped you navigate whatever barriers you do face. So, for example, I grew up in poverty. When I say that, I mean that explicitly: homelessness, foster care. You know, I had a deep sense of shame as a child, and I also always knew I was white. I mean, please. And today, you wouldn't know I grew up in poverty, right? Being white has absolutely helped me navigate it. I mean, I don't know. It seems so patently obvious that to be poor and white is going to be different than to be poor and black, because you might be dealing with classism, but you aren't also dealing with racism.
Why is race such a difficult topic? That's something I've never been able to wrap my brain around, is why it's, of all of the things, this topic is so difficult for people to have rational conversations about.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things I try to really show in the book, right, is that it's almost like a stew inside of white people that makes us irrational on this topic. And it's a combination of obliviousness, right, and actually at the same time knowing that it's better to be white. What white person doesn't know it's better to be white in this society, right? But we can never admit that. Deep entitlement, deep resentment, and superiority. I think there is something so anti-Black in this culture. And there's a kind of need. I cannot be superior if you are not inferior. I need you, and I need you to be inferior. I know that's a really blunt thing to say, but I'm trying to reveal the consciousness that makes white people so irrational on this topic. I am not saying that GLBTQ people do not struggle and face barriers. In fact, I think trans women of color are probably the most at danger moving through the world. But when I look at the progress that GLBTQ folks have made relatively quickly compared to racial progress, my best sense of that is that white people see the humanity of GLBTQ people because they tend to be in our lives, our brothers, our sisters, our children, right, our neighbors. There's the human face that most white people can put to gay people. But segregation is so profound in this society. Most white people can't put the humanity to Black people, especially when we are relentlessly being pumped with very, very negative images.
Is racism learned? Is it like an inherited trait?
Oh, I think it's learned, absolutely. It's a relatively new construct, right? Even Kinde really, really nicely puts it, right, that you, and Ta-Nehisi Coates also says, right, I think he says racism is the father and race is the child. So you always start with the exploitation of a group of people who have resources that you want and that you're able to exploit, and then you make up a story to justify the exploitation. I think most white people think that racism has always been there, since, humans, and that it's just because we're afraid of difference. And that is not true at all. Again, it's a relatively new idea. And in past times, people didn't travel far enough to see the kinds of things we see with our eyes that we attribute to racial difference. So no, I think it's absolutely learned.
Do you think we've progressed at all since, you mentioned the civil rights area earlier in our conversation, and I have this debate, conversation, argument with people all the time, and that especially here, given where we're at in 2018 and given some of the recent news that we've gotten from the Trump administration, I don't think we have progressed.
Yeah, I don't either. And I think part of that narrative comes from the ideology that history is this arc of progress, right? So we're taught to think about it as kind of a linear arc going upward. And in fact, it's very circular. Kinde has this concept of kind of three. There's segregationist, which is straight up, you are inferior. There's assimilationist. Well, discrimination's wrong, but you must have done something to cause your problems. And then anti-racist, which says racial disparity can only be the result of racism if you truly believe all people are equal. And these three trajectories, teachers are classic assimilationists, right? Discrimination's wrong, but they just don't value education, right? Those three narratives have always been in competition. And, one will make some progress, another will come through. And so it's this constant power struggle. And we're in a moment where the segregationist line has erupted with vigor.
At first I thought, we're moving backwards. That was my first thought. When you start to see all these different things happen, we're moving backwards. We're regressing back to the 60s. And the more I think about it and the more I see it, we're not moving backwards. We never moved forward. It was just masked differently. It was covered up.
Yeah, and in fact, by most measures, our outcomes are getting more disparate, not less. It's actually increasing at the same time that the average white person sees themselves as completely exempt from any part of this problem.
And you don't think, you mentioned this, I think that at the very end of the book, that you don't think even yourself is, again, paraphrasing, clear of all racism.
No way. No, and I won't be, not in my lifetime. I don't think that's possible. I am clear that I do less harm than I used to. I'm not defensive at all when I do it. I don't do it intentionally, but I step in it. I reveal my socialization. And I have very good repair skills. And as a result of this work, I can say that a significant enough number of people of color do see me as a supportive person. But I am not free of my conditioning. So it's the moment we start to feel complacent that actually the system depends on it. I think I even say at the end of the book that the default of our institutions and our society and norms and practices and traditions is the reproduction of racial inequality. I mean, we've been doing it for a really long time, and we're really effective and efficient at it. I mean, schools couldn't be more effective at reproducing racial inequality. And we all know that, or we wouldn't care what schools our children went to. And all this system needs to keep on keeping on is white people being really nice. Just be really nice. Go about your day, smile at people of color, go to lunch on occasion, do nothing else, and you will play your part. Because niceness is not courageous in any way. It's not strategic. It won't get racism on the table. It won't keep it on the table when everybody wants it off the table. It takes a lot of consistent effort. And every moment that I push against the conditioning I've received, it's coming right back at me. There's no free space. So, it takes vigilance and commitment. And I need to say, nothing is more rewarding than this work. Nothing is more liberating than starting from the premise that, of course, if you are white, you have been thoroughly conditioned into superiority. And so you can stop denying and defending and deflecting and start trying to figure out, so what does that look like in my daily life? And how might I do something different?
And so for a portion of this audience that might be listening and hearing you and thinking, Dr. DiAngelo, I don't even see color. I am the least racist person you know. Why do I have to walk on eggshells around people of color?
God, it's such entitlement. So sorry, I'm having a reaction. And of course, they will have that. There will be people that have that response. First of all, you do too see color. Knock it off. I mean, nobody says to me, I don't see that you're white.
Right.
We only say that to people of color, and that's because, of course, we notice. When I hear that, I think, this person doesn't understand basic socialization. You couldn't understand socialization and think that you don't see color and that you treat everyone the same. You couldn't understand culture, and you cannot be self-aware if that's what you think. And I can tell you after talking to countless people of color, that is not convincing remotely to people of color. In fact, often I am told that's the most dangerous white person right there. Mm-hmm. Complete denial.
And
wake up. And walking on eggshells, oh my goodness, you might have to be slightly inconvenient. You might actually have to think about what you say. You might actually have to engage when you say something you didn't know or intend to be problematic, and you found out that it is. It's like the worst fear of white people is that we'll accidentally say something racist. But dear God, don't you dare tell me I just said something racist.
And those are the same people who will say, well, I have a white friend, or you have no idea how much I do for the African American community.
Ooh. Well, I'm saying you have no idea how racist that is, at what you just said. How condescending and patronizing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's easier said than done. For a lot of white people, just suggesting that being white has meaning will cause us to kind of erupt in umbrage. I mean, that's white fragility. It functions beautifully, doesn't it?
Well, you had such again, I can't recommend this book enough, but there was such a wonderful quote near the beginning. I actually think it was in the introduction, or it was somewhere really close to the beginning. We will not move forward in race relations if we remain comfortable. That's such an extraordinary line to me, because people desperately want to be comfortable. Yeah,
well, again, in a society that's deeply separate and unequal by race, the question that I offer that has never failed me in my efforts to uncover, how this keeps being reproduced is, how does it function? How does white comfort function in a society so separate and unequal by race?
You did something that I've never heard anyone else do in the book also. You broke down the complexities of being biracial, unlike any person I have ever heard break down before other than biracial people. Like, you explain daily life to a T about not fitting in with one group, or being too dark for this group and too light for this group, or talking one way and this group's not going to respect that, or talking this way and the other group isn't going to respect that. It's a battle I think few can truly understand unless you are biracial.
So two things. One is that, when white people want to learn from people of color, it's just be in relationship, right? I mean, what I was able to articulate comes from in two ways. One, day in and day out for the last 20 years, engaging in conversations about race and racism, right? And listening and paying attention and bearing witness, and building my capacity for the discomfort sometimes of those conversations. But also, one of my closest mentors, my first book is actually dedicated to her, Darlene Flynn, and she's certainly credited in my acknowledgments. She is a biracial woman, and she has really helped me think through that experience.
Do you think people, particularly white people, do you think they want to hear what you're saying?
I think there's a mix. I think that the current political climate just tore the very, very thin veneer off of this post-racial, idea. And there are people who are feeling gleeful about that because now they can say and do whatever they want. But there are a lot of people who just feel this deep sense of urgency and despair. And they're a bit unmoored by it. I mean, part of that is what it means to be white, right? That we would be unmoored by this, right? That we would not understand how it came to be. But there is a kind of, again, urgency to understand. And so I actually am finding audiences more receptive today than they used to be. I'm pretty good at what I do. I've been doing it a really long time. But I think that the climate has made those who do care, it's pushed us out of apathy. It's like seeing a video, right? Walking through your day just oblivious, but then when you actually witness it, it's a little bit of a wake-up call.
But it's still amazing, even with those videos, how defensive people become when those videos are I feel like those videos have actually increased the defensiveness of white people, because I was using before we started our conversation, I was using the Starbucks incident as an example of, like, how did the police not get there and realize this isn't a police matter, this is silly? Or just asking the manager, do you have a policy about people not being allowed in here? And then the video goes viral, and of course it goes on social media, and you start reading some of the comments and you realize you don't even know what happened. You're just defending either cops versus black men or white people versus black men. You're not defending actually what actually happened, and what happened was nothing.
Yeah. So the first thing is I just do not read comments, just so you know.
Yeah. That's the way to live life.
you have to say, so who's most likely to write those comments, right? You just have to remember all that. And, I mean, we also have a rise up in people that are pushing against these things. But, to be blunt, I believe the white collective fundamentally hates blackness, hates black people. Nothing seems to turn white people's cranks of resentment like thinking black people got something over on us that they don't deserve, because at the deep level, we've been conditioned to see black people as fundamentally undeserving. So you're also seeing the rage and umbrage of white supremacy, right? How dare you look me in the eye? I want to go back to the good old days when you couldn't look me in the eye, when you stepped off the curb. I'm sorry, but it's not just obliviousness. It's anti-blackness and white superiority, and this stuff is triggering it because it was more, I think, under the surface before. At least it wasn't so in front of us and naming our patterns this way.
You've been so wonderful with your time. I have one last thing in my notes that I have to bring up because, again, you wrote about it brilliantly. Reverse racism isn't a thing. It
does not exist. There's no such thing. All people have racial bias. And you could, not even know me and just decide that I'm, clueless just because I'm white. It would be biased. It might hurt my feelings. When you have a group's collective bias backed by legal authority and institutional control, it is transformed so that my bias towards you has a very, very different impact. So I reserve that term to describe dynamics and interactions where one side of that is backed with the weight of institutional power. You have to have some kind of language to acknowledge that. And so there's no such thing as reverse racism.
I can't thank you enough for your time today. And congratulations again on the book. It's really, I can't recommend it enough. It's such a great read. And it's really, it's a great starting great starting point for people who just might not get it. It's fantastic.
Oh, thank you so much. That means the world to me.
Again, the book is called White Fragility. Available, wherever you buy books, wherever you order books. I listen to a lot of books now, especially now that we do this podcast, because I'm trying to get so many different authors on, and it's much easier for me to listen to books than walk around with them. And this was a quick read, just took a little over 6 hours. I got it done over the weekend. And I know a lot of people listening may not particularly be comfortable with what they heard. And I'll go back to the line from Dr. DiAngelo's book, "We will not move forward in race relations if we remain comfortable." A lot of people may have rolled their eyes at what Dr. DiAngelo said. And, you have that mentality that I'm not racist. I can't possibly be racist. And I think there's a certain point to, well, I have black friends. If you've ever had to rationalize why you're not racist, you probably are. And that, again, an important note is racism isn't reserved for the evil. It doesn't mean you're a horrible person because you've had this particular thought. But you do see color. Everybody sees color, no matter what color you are. If you're black, you're white, if you're Mexican, if you're Asian, you do see color. And to pretend like you don't is silly. It's silly for all of us. Because we do. You don't have to rationalize how you feel to anybody. You just have to understand it. And if you want to correct it, you have to understand how to correct it. And that's what Dr. DiAngelo's book is all about. Again, it's called White Fragility. It just came out like a week ago at the end of June. It came out. Again, a really quick read. It's very much worth your time. I can't thank you enough for tuning in. As always, be sure to check out The Lowdown every Monday through Friday on Sports 1140 AM. If you're in Northern California, if you're listening somewhere else in the world, it's the sports show that we do every single day with my partner, Jason Ross. You can check us out on the KHDK app if you like. You can even search The Lowdown here in the same podcast platform that you're listening to Be Conscious. Hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. If you think we're worth it, hit the 5-star review if you'd be so kind. As I noted at the start of the show, that helps us get picked up in the various algorithms in the different podcast platforms. Refer us to friends. Share us on social media. If you have any feedback, both the good, the bad, the angry, whatever it may be, we take it all. We've gotten a lot of it, and I really do appreciate those who have taken the time to reach out and share their thoughts on this podcast. Barling at saclocalmedia.com. Also, we've created a Facebook page. We've created an Instagram page. On Instagram, we're Be Conscious Pod. On Facebook, same thing, Be Conscious with Damien Barling. Search them out. You'll find us. We have an amazing show planned next week. I don't want to tell you who it is because I'm fearful something might go wrong, but it's one of the biggest guests that we've had in the young history of this show, and I think you're really, really going to enjoy it. And as soon as that episode is recorded, it's put away, and I know it's going to air for you next week, I'll make sure we put it out there on social media. But if all goes according to plan, it's going to be a real, real good one. We are not fighting for integration, nor are we fighting for separation. We are fighting for recognition as human beings. In fact, we are actually fighting for rights that are even greater than civil rights, and that is human rights. And that is Malcolm X. I'm Damien Barling. We'll see you next week.